What if I told you that one of the biggest names in hip-hop is suddenly gone silent? Not just low-key, not just off social media, but completely vanished from the spotlight right when the internet is demanding answers and right at the center of this storm. A pregnancy rumor, a possible betrayal, and a marriage that may or may not be quietly collapsing behind the scenes. Because when news broke that Latto was pregnant, fans didn't just ask, "Who is the father?" They pointed straight at one man, 21 Savage. But here's where things take a darker, more dramatic turn. Reports are now swirling that his so-called wife, yes, the woman who has stood by him for years, has finally snapped. Sources claim she's not staying silent anymore. And what she allegedly has to say could change everything. And the biggest question of all, is 21 Savage really in hiding? Or is he being forced to disappear from a situation that just got way too real? Because when a love triangle turns into a public storm, and a baby rumor turns into a global headline, you know something behind the scenes is about to explode. Let's rewind for a second. Because to understand how this story spiraled into what it is today, you have to look at the history, the patterns, and the quiet tension that was building long before the internet even caught on. Because this isn't just about a pregnancy rumor. This is about reputation, control, and what happens when a carefully managed public image starts to crack. At the center of it all is Latto, an artist who has spent years crafting a very specific identity, confident, independent, in control, and very clear about one thing: she was not here to follow the typical industry woman storyline. No baby mama drama, no public chaos, no being tied down without a ring. That was the brand. And then there's 21 Savage, an artist who has built his reputation on being mysterious, calculated, and extremely private about his personal life. Someone who rarely speaks, rarely explains, and never really addresses rumors directly. Put those two personalities together, and you already have the perfect environment for speculation, silence, and assumptions to grow. Now, for years, fans noticed something strange. They worked together. They appeared in similar spaces. They shared a certain energy in their interactions that people couldn't ignore. But whenever questions came up about what was actually going on between them, denials, silence, deflection. No confirmation, no clarity, just enough ambiguity to keep people guessing. And that's where the internet does what it always does best: it fills in the blanks. But the situation didn't become explosive until something changed. Because suddenly, without warning, Latto began shifting her entire narrative. Old posts, gone. Public image, refined. And then quietly, strategically, she started teasing something bigger. An album rollout that didn't feel like a normal rollout at all. It felt intentional, controlled, almost like every detail was designed to lead up to one specific reveal. And then it happened. A music video dropped, and with it, a visual that instantly changed the conversation. A baby bump, not hinted, not rumored. Shown. And not just shown in any way, but presented as part of a larger artistic and promotional vision, blending her personal life directly into her professional rollout. Now, here's where things get complicated, because in a world where celebrity announcements are usually straightforward press releases, interviews, official statements, this was different. This was storytelling. And storytelling leaves room for interpretation. Within hours, fans started dissecting every frame, every hand movement, every reflection, every tattoo visible in the video. And that's when the speculation locked onto one name, not because it was confirmed, but because it was familiar. The internet started pointing toward 21 Savage, analyzing tattoos, comparing hand shapes, and piecing together fragments of visual clues, as if they were solving a crime scene. And once that idea entered the conversation, it spread like wildfire. But here's the critical part that often gets overlooked. At no point did either Latto or 21 Savage publicly confirm that he is the father. That's the line between fact and speculation. But the internet, it doesn't wait for confirmation. It builds narratives. And in this case, the narrative quickly turned from curiosity into controversy. Because if the rumors were even partially true, then the implications are massive. We're not just talking about a baby, we're talking about timing, relationships, allegiances, and potentially betrayal. And that's where the tone of the conversation started shifting from, is she pregnant, to who is responsible, from what is happening, to who is to blame. And suddenly, this wasn't just entertainment anymore, it became personal. People began revisiting old statements from Latto, pointing out how she had previously emphasized that she wouldn't put herself in a situation where she was tied to a man without commitment. They started questioning whether her image, her message, and her reality were now in conflict. At the same time, attention turned toward 21 Savage's personal life, because if he is involved in this situation, then the question isn't just about him and Latto. It's about what already exists in his life. Rumors began circulating about a long-term partner, someone he's reportedly built a life with behind the scenes, a woman who has been connected to him for years, a woman who, according to online speculation, may now be forced to watch her private life become a public topic. And that's where the narrative takes another turn, because now the internet is no longer just observing. It's assigning roles: victim, villain, side character, main character. And in the middle of all that, silence. No direct confirmation, no official statements, no clean answers. Just fragments of information being pieced together by millions of people trying to make sense of a story that refuses to fully reveal itself. But silence in situations like this is never just silence. It's interpreted, and when people interpret silence, they tend to fill it with the worst possible assumptions, which brings us to the most explosive layer of this entire situation: the idea that someone somewhere might be feeling betrayed or blindsided. Or even disrespected, because whether the rumors are true or not, perception alone is powerful enough to shift public opinion, and right now, perception is doing all the talking. Fans are divided. Some believe this is simply a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Others are convinced that something deeper is happening behind the scenes, and a growing number of people are watching closely, waiting for the next move, because in stories like this, the truth rarely comes out all at once. It leaks. It surfaces in fragments. In reactions, in posts, in subtle changes in behavior that people online are trained to detect. And that's exactly what people are now watching for: any sign of acknowledgement, any shift in tone, any hint that confirms or denies what's already being widely discussed. Because once a story reaches this level, it stops being just about the individuals involved. It becomes a public investigation, and right now, the case is still open. By the time this story reached its second wave, it was no longer just about curiosity or speculation. It had turned into a full-blown internet investigation. And once that happens, every small detail suddenly becomes evidence, every silence becomes suspicious, every move becomes a clue. At the center of this growing storm, the focus shifted back to Latto and 21 Savage, but not just as artists anymore. Now, they were being treated like key figures in a narrative that the public itself was trying to solve. And that's where things started getting louder. More clips surfaced. Older interviews were revisited. Fans began analyzing past moments that at the time seemed harmless, but in hindsight, everything looked different. A laugh here, a pause there, a subtle reaction that in isolation meant nothing, but in the context of a scandal, suddenly meant everything. That's how internet narratives evolved. Not from new information. But from reinterpreting old information through a new lens. And once that process begins, there's no stopping it. One of the most talked about angles in this entire situation revolves around control. Control over the narrative, control over the truth, and control over public perception. Because one of the most powerful things about silence is that it allows the audience to project whatever story they want onto it. And right now, the audience isn't holding back. There are people convinced that everything is part of a calculated rollout, that the pregnancy reveal wasn't just personal, it was strategic, a way to generate attention. to shift the conversation, to dominate headlines. Others believe the opposite, that something real is happening behind the scenes, and that the public is only seeing the surface of a much deeper, more complicated situation. But here's where the narrative takes an even sharper turn, because now attention is not just on the two artists. It's also on the alleged reactions happening off camera. Reports, unverified, but widely circulated, began suggesting that someone close to 21 Savage might be reacting to the situation in private. And once that idea entered the conversation, the internet latched onto it immediately. Suddenly, every like, every comment, every subtle interaction on social media became proof of anger, proof of tension, proof of a situation that no one has officially confirmed exists. And that's where things get dangerous, because when speculation becomes accepted as truth, it starts influencing public opinion in real time. Now, the audience isn't just watching, they're judging. And the language online began to reflect that shift. People started talking about loyalty, about respect, about consequences. Some framed the situation as a betrayal. Others framed it as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by the internet. But no matter which side they were on, one thing was clear: the story had taken on a life of its own. And once a story reaches that point, the individuals involved lose control of how it's perceived. Even their silence becomes part of the narrative. Now, let's talk about the idea that pushed this situation into its most intense phase, the idea that someone is in hiding, because that phrase alone carries weight. It implies avoidance. It implies pressure. It implies that something is happening behind the scenes that hasn't been made public. And when that phrase gets attached to someone like 21 Savage, who is known for being extremely private, it adds another layer of mystery. Is he avoiding the conversation? Or is he simply staying true to his established pattern of privacy? That question alone splits the audience. Some believe his silence is strategic, others believe it's suspicious, but either way, the silence itself is now part of the story. Meanwhile, Latto continues to operate within her own narrative. She's not hiding, she's not disappearing, she's presenting her story in a very controlled, very deliberate way, through visuals, through music, through carefully timed releases. And that contrast is what makes this situation even more intriguing, because on one side, you have visibility. On the other side, you have silence. And that contrast creates tension. It creates speculation. It creates questions that no one is rushing to answer, but there's something else happening underneath all of this. Something more subtle. The public is not just reacting to the situation itself, they're reacting to what the situation represents, because this story touches on themes that people already have strong opinions about. Relationships, power, dynamics, public image, and the idea of accountability in the spotlight. That's why the reactions are so intense, because people aren't just commenting on Latto or 21 Savage, they're projecting their own beliefs onto the situation. And that makes the conversation louder. More emotional. More divided, more difficult to control. As the days go on, the lack of confirmation becomes more noticeable. Because in most celebrity situations, clarity comes quickly. A statement, a denial, a confirmation, something that defines the narrative and puts speculation to rest. But in this case, that clarity hasn't come. And in the absence of clarity, the narrative continues to grow. New theories emerge. Old theories evolve. And the story becomes less about what is known and more about what could be. Which brings us to the most critical question at this stage of the investigation. Is this a real-life situation that's unfolding in real time? Or is this a carefully constructed moment designed to generate attention, conversation, and dominance in the media space? Because both possibilities carry weight. Both possibilities change how the story is perceived. And both possibilities lead to very different conclusions. But for now, the truth remains just out of reach. And the internet isn't slowing down. If anything, It's just getting started. By the time this story reaches its final act, the noise has already taken over. What started as a simple pregnancy reveal has now evolved into a full-scale media spectacle, one that has pulled in fans, critics, and observers from every corner of the internet. And at the center of it all still are Latto and 21 Savage. But here's the thing about stories like this. The louder they get, the less they rely on facts. And the more they rely on perception. At this stage, the conversation is no longer just about whether the rumors are true or false. It's about what people believe is true. And belief, once it spreads at this level, becomes incredibly difficult to reverse, because now every action is interpreted, every silence is questioned. And every absence is filled with meaning. Let's talk about the idea that 21 Savage is in hiding, whether literal or symbolic. That phrase carries a lot of weight in the public imagination. To some, it suggests avoidance. To others, it simply reflects his long-standing personality, someone who has always kept his private life separate from his public career. But in the context of this situation, that same behavior is being viewed differently, not as privacy, but as silence under pressure, and that perception alone is enough to fuel more theories. Meanwhile, Latto's approach remains completely different. She is visible, she is active, and she is leaning into her narrative in a way that feels intentional. Her rollout, her visuals, and her messaging all suggest one thing. She is not running from the conversation. She is controlling it. And in today's media environment, controlling the narrative is everything, because whoever controls the narrative controls the story, and whoever controls the story controls the perception. But perception is a double-edged sword, because while some people see confidence and control, others see controversy and contradiction, and that divide is what keeps this story alive. Now, let's address something important. Throughout this entire situation, there has been no confirmed legal action. No verified official statement from either party addressing the pregnancy in a direct and factual way, and no confirmed evidence that validates the more extreme claims circulating online. Everything remains in a space of ambiguity, and that ambiguity is exactly what allows the story to continue evolving. But in situations like this, ambiguity also creates risk, because the longer a narrative remains unresolved, the more space there is for misinformation to grow. And once misinformation spreads far enough, it starts to feel like truth. That's the stage this story is at right now. A point where lines are blurred, where fact and fiction overlap, and where audiences are left trying to decide what to believe. But beyond the speculation, there's another layer to this story that often gets overlooked, and that's the human side. Because behind all the headlines, behind all the commentary, and behind all the online debates, there are real people involved. People whose lives are being discussed, analyzed, and judged by millions. And that comes with consequences, not just professionally, but personally, because when a situation becomes this public, it stops being private forever, even if the facts remain unclear. Even if no one ever confirms the details, the narrative itself becomes permanent. And that's the reality of modern fame. Once a story reaches this level of attention, it doesn't just disappear. It lingers. It evolves. And it continues to be referenced, discussed, and debated long after the initial moment has passed. So where does that leave us now? With more questions than answers. With more theories than confirmations. And with a story that refuses to fully reveal itself. Is this a carefully managed rollout designed to dominate headlines? Is this a real personal situation unfolding under intense public scrutiny? Or is this exactly what it looks like? A mix of truth, speculation, and perception colliding in real time? Right now, there's no definitive answer, but one thing is certain. This is not the end of the conversation, because stories like this don't end when the headlines fade. They end when the truth finally comes out. And until that happens, the speculation will continue, the theories will grow, and the internet will keep watching, waiting for the next move. Because in a world where attention is everything, the story isn't over. It's just getting started, and just like that, This story is far from finished, because what you've just seen isn't just another celebrity rumor. It's a developing narrative that's still unfolding in real time. And the biggest question remains, what is actually true, and what has been shaped by speculation? Is Latto really expecting a child connected to 21 Savage? Or is this another case where the internet has jumped ahead of the facts? And if there really is tension behind the scenes, why is everything still so quiet? Why hasn't anyone directly addressed the situation in a clear, undeniable way? Because silence in moments like this speaks louder than words, and that's exactly why you need to stay tuned. Make sure you like this video, because every like helps push this story further into the spotlight. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe this is real? Or is the internet just creating another narrative out of thin air? And don't forget to subscribe, because when the next piece of this story drops, you already know we'll be the first to break it down.